So Christine and I left a couple weeks ago to go on vacation, and about a week or two before we left, I had noticed my truck every once in a while was making a little vibrating feeling, like you ever go off the side on the highway and hit the rumble strip and you get that rumbling feeling. It was kind of like that a little bit, but intermittent, and I looked it up and like, what could this be? And I realized, it could be my torque converter, which for those of you who know nothing about cars except the one on the right makes it go and the one on the left makes it stop. That's the thing that connects the motor with all the power to the transmission, basically. It's an important part. So I tried to call My Mechanic, and I couldn't get into My Mechanic because they are booked up into August at the time. And so I went to Plan B, which was another mechanic down the road who I've used once before, and they're okay. Brought it to them, and they said, yeah, we've got to replace the whole torque converter. It's going to be like $7,000. I'm like, well, okay, wait a minute. Anybody who knows anything knows that shouldn't cost $7,000. The whole transmission shouldn't even cost $7,000 unless I was driving something crazy. So I said, thank you, I'll take the truck back, and you guys can go along on your own. And I went to a transmission place that we've used as a church before. They've done really good for us, and we've been blessed by them. And I brought it to them, and they couldn't look at it for a couple weeks, so I had to leave it with them while we went on vacation. I was stuck driving Christina's car for vacation, and that was miserable. But they called me a week or so later and said, yeah, we looked at it, and we caught it early. I think we'll just swap the fluid out, and you're good to go. So from $7,000 to just a couple $100. And here's the question, who do you trust? Right? Who do you trust? When you've got to bring, and everybody knows, cars are the tough thing, whether you're buying one or trying to get one fixed. Who do you trust? If you need to get some work done on your house, who do you trust is going to come and do a good job? They're not going to cheat you. They're not going to inflate the price. Who do you trust? And it's not just things like that. How many of you have been burned by somebody in your life? Someone you trusted? And the rest of you who aren't raising your hands, you just don't want to raise your hand. Someone you trusted let you down. Maybe they even acted like an enemy to you, and you would put trust in them, and you've been burned by that. How many of you are struggling right now with knowing who to trust when it comes to our world, when it comes to politics? Who do we trust? We're going to do a series in the fall, by the way. Our life group's going to go through a series about how we as Christians should interact with all these things, hopefully to help us navigate what the fall is going to be like. But who do you trust? It's become clear over the last decade how little we can trust news and all these things, no matter which version you're listening to. It's become harder and harder to know who to trust when it comes to news and politics and money. Who do you trust? Who can you trust? The psalm we're about to read today was written by King David. Throughout his life, David dealt with all kinds of trust issues. People who betrayed his trust. The king he was serving, King Saul, he was playing music for him one day on a harp, trying to make the guy happy, and the guy chucked a spear at him. You think your spouse sometimes lashes out in an emotional way. They ever throw a spear at you while you were playing music for them? Like, okay, that's a break in trust, isn't it? His own son tried to kill him and take the throne from him. Friends betrayed him. He knew what it was to struggle with trust. David had wealth. David had power. David had armies, position, status. He was on top of the world. But he still struggled with knowing who and what to trust. And he learned some hard lessons about who to trust and who not to trust. And thankfully for us, he wrote them down in these Psalms and the one we're going to look at today. So what we're benefiting from today, before we get into it, I want you to go in with this mindset. We're benefiting from the writings of a person who has lived through all kinds of pain and betrayals, just like we experience, only on even a higher level. And having gone through all of that, he sat down to write about it in a poem, in a psalm, a song, so that we could learn what he learned about trust and where to put it. So here's what he wrote. And today, you're going to want to follow along in the app or on the screen, because what I've done to try and help make this psalm clear is I've kind of worked the translation to highlight some of the important aspects of it. So this is kind of a hybrid of my translation with others to help call out what's going on in the psalm and help us see it clearly. So if you've got our app, go there right now and you can follow along and take notes, or follow on the screen. Psalm 62, he says, "Only for God will I wait calmly. My salvation comes from him. Only he is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I will not be severely shaken. Oh, how long will you threaten a man? Will you, all of you, attack as if he were a wobbly wall or a tottering fence? Only people. They plan together to rob my dignity. They take pleasure in lying. They bless with their mouths, but they curse inwardly. And that word, Selah, there means pause. So let's pause there on that. Just think about that for a moment. Maybe you've experienced that. Then he turns around and talks to himself. Only in God rest, my soul, for my hope comes from him. He's reminding himself now. Only he is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I will not be shaken. My salvation and honor, dignity, depend on God, my strong rock. My refuge is in God. Trust in him at all times, all you people. Pour out your hearts before him. God is our refuge. Stop. Think. Reflect on that. Only people. The low ones are puffs of air. The high ones are just an illusion. Together on a scale, they go up, lighter than a puff of air. So place no trust in oppression or extortion or false hope and robbery. If power increases, don't set your heart on it. God spoke. I heard two things. Strength belongs to God. Faithful love belongs to you, Lord. For you repay each of us according to our works. Father, again, open our ears to hear your word. I want you to think this morning about where you've been putting your trust. What are the things you've been putting your trust in? We're talking about trust with a capital T here. With a capital T. We're talking about the trust of your life. What gives you purpose and meaning, a sense of security and refuge, a thing that helps you know you're not shaken. Your life is secure, protected, preserved. Think about that. Where have you and where are you putting your trust? And can that thing, can that person or those people, can they carry the weight of your trust? Can they make you secure? Can they give you rest no matter what? Do they have perfect power and perfect love? Will they never fail? The greatest pains of our lives are often the result of misplaced trust. If you're feeling pain this morning, a good question to ask is, where am I misplacing my trust? David learned the hard way where not to put his trust. The first place he learned not to put his trust was in people. You cannot trust people. David learned you can't trust people. David's the king. David's on top of the world. He has wealth, he has power, he has armies, all that stuff. But he's still, just like all of us, a wobbly wall, he says. And the people around him, they see that he's not perfectly powerful and perfectly loving. And what do they try to do? When they see he's wobbly, they try and knock him down. That's what people do. Verse 4, he says, only people. That's what he's saying there is people alone. So this psalm has a lot of only in God, God alone, only in God, God alone, only people alone. That's a contrast he's doing here. Only people. They plan to rob my dignity. They want to tear me down. They take pleasure in lying. They bless with their mouths, but they curse inside their hearts. David learned you can't trust people because on our own, only people alone on their own, they will scratch and claw and lie and backstab and try to rob each other of dignity. And what you can count on people to do is to try and knock each other down and climb on top of the rubble. So I open up my news feed, read the articles, turn on the news. What do I see? What do I hear? I see a world of people trying to tear each other down, push over wobbly walls, rob each other of dignity, and build their lives on the ruins of other people's lives. It's everywhere we turn. It is the way of people. But it's not just out there. Why do we gossip? Why are we quick to parrot the things we hear someone else saying? Oh, did you hear? Oh, did you hear? Oh, did you hear? Without ever trying to determine whether or not the thing we're repeating actually is true about that person. Because when we have that thing to say about that other person, what do we feel? We feel like that's some power I feel right there. I feel power in having information. I feel power in having something interesting to say. I feel power in learning that, oh, they're actually not who everyone thinks they are. They're down a peg, and that makes me feel up a peg. I feel power with that. We're all diseased like this. Some of you work in environments where your coworkers function this way all the time, don't you? They speak nicely to each other. They're nice in front of each other. They joke around, they laugh, and then a person leaves and they tear them apart. We've all been there. We've all had it done to us. I'm going to take a guess and say we've all done it. You can't trust people. Not capital T trust people. Not with your life trust people. And look, David's not trying to make us all paranoid. I don't want you to start looking around the room like, can't trust any of these people. He's not saying that. He's not saying that people can't be trusted for anything. His point is that when it comes to the security of your life, what you're looking to give your life hope and meaning and value and purpose and stability that's eternal and lasting, it cannot be in people. Just talking to someone this past week or hearing how they haven't been in church for decades because one time one person did something to them in church. And so they walk away from God. Where was your trust? It was in people. Well, what can you trust people to do? To let you down, to fail, because we all do it. And so that shakes me, and then I don't want to be around church people because they're not perfect. Well, of course not. But is my faith in God? Is my trust in God, or is it in people? You can't trust people. And now some of you discovered that a long time ago, and at some point you decided, that's right, I realize I can't trust people, so I'm just going to trust who? Me. You can only trust yourself in this world. That's what a lot of people believe. Here's two problems with that. If you only trust yourself, thinking that's going to protect you from being harmed by others. Two problems. Number one, you're a people too. And you can't trust people. Think of all the times you've self-sabotaged. You wanted to be healthy, but you self-sabotaged. You wanted to have a good relationship, but you self-sabotaged it. You wanted to grow in some way, but you self-sabotaged. You can't trust you. And then a lot of us have this idea that, well, if I just get enough power, I'll be protected, and I'll do the right thing with the power I have. I'll be just and fair and kind to others and gracious and all that. No, you won't, because you're a people. And you can't get enough power, because guess what else you can't trust? David learned you can't trust people, but you know what else you can't trust? He learned you can't trust power. So look what he says. Remember, David's king. David's not like some person who's powerless saying, oh, I don't want power anyway. He has all the power. He's the king. He's got all the power, the wealth, the armies, all of it. More power than you and I will ever have. And he refuses to lean on that power because he learned it's not trustworthy. David, to get that power, do you remember what he was like? God anointed him to be king, but Saul was still king. Well, what did David do? Never spoke a word against Saul. Wouldn't attack Saul. He continued to be faithful and loyal, didn't rob, didn't extort or manipulate or anything. He waited. He went about it the right way and let God give it to him. But now that he has this power that God gave him and allowed him to have, he's watching all these other people lying, oppressing others, extorting, trying to use force and manipulation to get power from him because they think if they get the power, that'll make them more secure and more safe. They don't trust it in David's hands. I don't want to trust power over me into anybody else's hands. That's a very American way to feel about things. No, I'm going to be self-determining. I'm going to have the power over my life. And so they do whatever they can to extort and grab after that power. David sees what's going on and sees how they're working to get power. And so he writes, warning them, place no trust in oppression or extortion or false hope and robbery. If power increases, don't put your heart on it. That's not your hope in this world. Getting enough power to make things the way you want them to be so that you feel secure. That is not your hope in this world. And this word for power that he uses there in verse 10, it's the same word as used to talk about wealth and armies and all of it. So David, from experience, is telling all of us, don't trust in power, whether it's economic power or military power. Don't set your heart on it, even if you get it and have it. Because when you do, when you start going after that power, you'll start doing whatever you can to get it. And when you do whatever it takes to get it, you make enemies along the way, and it becomes one giant game of King of the Hill. Have you ever played King of the Hill? It's a very guy game to play, I know, but King of the Hill, I remember playing as a kid. My cousin, we'd go visit him in Connecticut, and they had a lot of hills where he lived. And me and his friends would go and we'd play King of the Hill, and you'd fight all your friends. You're all fighting each other to get on top of the hill. And you think, what happens when you get on top of the hill? You get to rest and relax, right? No. Now everybody's after you. When you're climbing the hill, you're with everybody trying to get whoever's on top. When you're on top, it's harder. Life is harder. And David sees the illusion of all this. Power is meaningless. And so he warns them, don't chase after power. Power and wealth don't secure your place on top of the world the way you think they do. They don't make you weighty so that nothing can move you. Just the opposite. David drops then what is my favorite line in this whole poem in verse 9. About how untrustworthy power and wealth and all the things we think make us have weight that'll secure us on top of the world. Listen to what he says. He says, only people. People alone, this is how they are. The lowly people, they're puffs of air. Now, most people would say yes, but the high people, the important people, those who've risen, they have gravitas and weight, and it's hard to move them. No, he says they're an illusion. They don't even exist. You put them both together on a scale, the second part of verse 9. Put them both together on a scale, and what happens? You ever use a scale? They go up. They go up. Lighter than a puff of air. They don't have any weight, even if you put us all together. Every one of us lives oftentimes like life is measured on a scale, and the goal is to be heavy. And the goal is to have as much weight as possible. And so we live as though the more wealth and power and joy and happiness and health and experiences and knowledge and skills and friends, the more I can add to my life, the more weight I have, the more secure I'll be, as though then that all gets added and I step on the scale and it's boom, it goes down because I've got weight to my life and that makes me secure. But then we step on the scale, David says, and what happens? We go up. We go up because we're lightweights, every one of us. Every one of us is a lightweight. Take all that you've achieved. You're a lightweight when you step on God's scale. You don't sink down with any gravity, any security. You just fly up into the air like a breath. He says, even if you took all the accomplishments of everybody, all people, think of all the great people of humanity, take all of them and all the rest of us too and put them on God's scale, and it all goes up. Because from God's scale, that's light. It's like, if I told you had to walk to church every Sunday you'd get to the hill here and you'd be like, oh, I can't do it. That's a big hill. Or you think about what it would take to hike across our country. You get to the Rockies. You get to these places where you got to climb mountains. But then think about the two astronauts stuck in space right now, looking down on the earth. What does it look like to them? They say it looks like a blue marble. It looks smooth. Because in God's scale, all the things that seem weighty and important to us, smooth, light. On God's scale, it amounts to nothing. David's not saying this because he's not saying people are worthless. That's not his point. This is about who can you trust. Where do you want to trust and put the trust of your life in? And his point is you can't trust people and you can't trust power or wealth or any of those things. They do not make us safe. They can't actually rescue you and me from this broken world. People in power can't do it. Recognize that our whole lives, you and me, we've been taught to live by this world around us. Taught to choose the right people to trust in, go after whatever power you can get, because that's what you can trust to make your life secure and stable. So go after the power of having enough savings, enough wealth, enough friends, enough all of that. And then it'll be harder for you to be shaken, even when the stock market goes crazy. Look to people in power in one way or another to make you feel secure in this world, but you still don't feel secure, or you soon won't feel secure. Because there's two kinds of people in the world. There are those who've learned that you can't trust people in power, and there are those who are about to learn at some point soon that you can't trust people or power. Our only hope, David concludes, from his experience, is God. You can trust God. And so this whole poem, this whole psalm is kind of David walking through. So it begins with David making a resolution, a declaration, saying, only for God am I going to wait calmly. Not like, please, God, hurry up. I'm waiting calmly. I trust him. But only for God. My salvation comes from him. Only he's my rock, my salvation, my stronghold. I will not be severely shaken. That's David saying, this is what I'm going to be like. And a lot of us, we believe that too. A lot of us in this room are like, yep, I believe in God. I trust God. I trust God above everything else. If I were to ask you to choose, you would say, I trust God above everything else. We're determined to trust in God. But then the second part of the poem hits. The second part of the psalm hits, and the people come out of the woodwork to tear us down. That's when a decision's got to get made. People start trying to knock David down and tear his dignity away from him. They start trying to push him over, and he's got to decide, am I going to follow through on that resolution from verse 1 and 2? Am I going to trust in God, or am I going to turn to people in power? And I can imagine in that moment when David has friends who are turning their backs on him, who he trusted, who are now betraying him, and knows that they're coming after him, that I can picture him doing what you and I would do, lying in his bed at night thinking about, what do I do? What do I do? How do I stop them? Can I use force? Do I have to use manipulation? What do I have to do? I can picture David laying there sleepless the way you and I do when we're in these moments. Thinking, well, I've got my army, I could just wipe them out. Or I've got money, I could bribe them and pay them off to not cause problems for me. But instead, he chooses to remind himself, no. I trust in God. So he begins to talk to himself. He begins to talk to his soul and says, I don't trust in people or power. I trust in God. That's what the third part of this psalm is about, verse 5 through 7. Only in God rest my soul. He's talking to himself now. Only in God rest. Hope comes from him. Only he is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor, my dignity, all the stuff they're trying to take from me, whether it's a sickness, a disease, or people, or whatever, it depends on God, not on me to defend it. It depends on God. My strong rock, my refuge is God. He's my honor, my dignity, my life. Only God can preserve those. Only God's able to protect you and me like a fortress. And in the face of everything and everyone that might be trying to tear you down and rob you of dignity, you can turn to people, or you can turn to your own power, or you can turn to God. Those are our choices. But only one of those is actually trustworthy, and that's God. So you've got a choice to make. Are you going to trust God, or are you going to keep trusting people in power? David learned, and he's telling us, you can really only trust God and live and survive. And some of you will object because you're like, hey, look, I've tried to trust God. You know, I trusted God for this thing or that thing, and God didn't come through. He didn't give it to me. I trusted him because I was dealing with a health thing, and he didn't heal me. I trusted him because there was a relationship thing, and he didn't fix it. I trusted him to get me more money, and he didn't get me more money. And you're like, so I don't believe you. I don't think I can trust God because I've tried that, and it didn't work out for me. And that's a tough spot to be, I know. Let me just ask you this. Who lied to you and told you that God is like some wonky vending machine? That you put your coins in, and then you wait for that spring, that coil to turn, and you hope, oh, please don't let it get snagged. Please let my blessing come. And you think, oh, sometimes I got to just shake God a little bit. Who lied to you and told you that that's what God is like? Because that is not who God is. That idea of who God is doesn't come from Scripture. Let's understand what trusting God actually means. What is it that we can trust God for? Because God never promised that he would come, that we could come to him and trade him anything, whether it's our worship, our devotion, our prayer, our money, our good behavior, and in exchange, get the things we really want from him. But that's often the relationship we end up having with God, where we try and give him these things. I come to church on Sunday, I give him the offering, I do good things, I try to be good, and we think we're just dropping coins, dollars now, into the vending machine and hoping that the coil turns and the blessing comes out and we kick it, we push it. That is a mistake that so many of us make about God, and it drives us away from God. We try to use God to get other things from God. That the other things are the things we think are going to make us secure. So like, God, cling, 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 cling. Okay, give me this because then I'll feel secure. And God's like, no, no, no. I make you feel secure, not that thing. Not your health. Not that relationship. Not that money. I'm the one. So we come to God saying, God, here are the things I need to make me feel secure, to make me, that I want to trust in. And God's like, whoa, 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 whoa. No. God's not in the business of giving us those things because God's not in the business of giving us lies. God doesn't give us those things. What God does give us is himself. That's what God promises to give you and me. We don't deserve that, but that's what God promises to give us. God's already given you and me the breath we're breathing. God's given us existence. And we sit here and we think it's all about us. We sit here listening even to this message thinking, oh, but here's my. We think it's all about us. God gave you this existence. Is that not a gift? And now God calls on you not to look to him to get things from him, other things to replace him. But God says, no, you can trust me, though, to give you me. You can trust me to give you me. Let me show you how David discovered that. At the end of the psalm, David reveals two things he learned about God. Through all of his experiences, David didn't even have Jesus to lean on for this. He didn't know what we know about what God's done through Jesus. But still, through all of his experiences, through his rise to power and all the challenges to power, all the betrayals, all the highs and the lows, David heard God speak and he learned two things about who God is. That's what he's talking about in verse 11 and 12. He said, God spoke, I heard two things. Number one, strength, power, belongs to God. And number two, faithful love belongs to God. Belongs to you, Lord. And he ends with this line, for you repay each of us according to our works. I want you to hear what he said there. He doesn't say, oh, God's loving, God has power. He said, strength and power belong to God. They're his. So any person you see who appears to have strength and power, it's just on loan from God. God's the one who has, it belongs to him, the power. Any power you have, it's not yours. It belongs to God. Strength and power belongs to God. But not just that. The second thing, and this is, you got to have both of these together or you don't have God. Steadfast love. We've talked about that a few times over the last several weeks. Craig brought it up in the first week. God's unfailing, pursuing love. Steadfast love. That belongs to God too. God owns it. God owns power and unfailing love. God is the perfect balance of power and unfailing love. And that's demonstrated in what? In perfect justice. God meting out perfect justice. How do we know that God possesses power and steadfast love and perfect balance and gives perfect justice? The cross. The cross proves it. This is why we lean so much on the cross and on Jesus and what he did. Because it proves God's perfect power and perfect love that David realized years and years and years before from his own personal experiences with God. But the cross demonstrates God has perfect power and perfect love. Power to deal with our sin and the love to rescue us from it. Jesus put the weight of his own life on the scale in our place. He made himself the object of justice. You and I, we get on the scale even if we all jump on together. Sometimes I'll do that to Christina. She's getting on the scale. I'll try and sneak my foot in. And Jesus doesn't sneak his foot in. Jesus says, excuse me. And he gets on the scale in our place. Takes the weight of his life and that justice you and I deserve. And he takes it on his own shoulders. He made himself the object of justice so you and I could be the object of grace. That's why you can trust God. Yes, he's perfect power, and that's scary, but he's also perfect, steadfast, unfailing love. I don't know how David understood this without seeing Jesus, but he did, and that tells me that It's possible for you and me to experience God in this way, perfect love and perfect power, not only by looking at the cross and Jesus, but also in a daily relationship with him. For us, the foundation, the beginning point is we look back to Jesus and what he did, and we say, wow, that's perfect love, that's perfect power. But it doesn't end there, it began there. And when I read what David learned and how he learned it, I hope this makes sense. That tells me, that excites me, because it means that you and me, we can experience God in this way every day. Not just historically, but moment by moment. God's perfect love and perfect power in our lives. We can experience God as our refuge, our strength, our salvation, our fortress every day. Like David, you and I can say, you know what? I'm not waiting on any of these other things. I'm not waiting for that Bitcoin thing to hit. I'm not waiting for that new job to hit. I'm not waiting for that new treatment to come out that's going to be the miracle cure, that's going to make me skinny or make the disease go away. I'm not waiting and putting my weight on those things. I'm waiting only on God. Waiting calmly, not frantically, only on God. Are you waiting calmly today? Or has your life felt frantic, anxious? Your life doesn't have to be driven and consumed by worries and fear because of all the things that are trying to rob your dignity from you and show how powerless you are and knock you down because you're a wobbly wall just like me and every one of us. Here's how you and I can wait calmly on the Lord, with our souls finding rest, even in the middle of chaos and people attacking us, or life circumstances trying to rob our dignity and topple us over. Here's how we can wait calmly on the Lord. David, in verse 8, it's the only verse he turns and addresses all of us and speaks directly to all of us and tells us how to do this. He says, trust in him at all times. Pour out your hearts before him. God is our refuge. Some of you never pour your hearts out to God. Maybe you did one time, but most of the time you just hold that back. You think you're not going to pour your heart out to anybody because you're strong and you're not going to open up. I'm not going to pour my heart out, and you hold that all in there, and you think you're strong, and you think you're trusting your own power to be strong, and you're going to keep just putting your head down and muddling through day after day. But the reality is we're all pouring our hearts out somewhere. You may not know that when you're going to the bottom of a bottle, that's you pouring your heart out. That's what's happening. You may not know that when you're chasing cheap sex, that's you pouring your heart out. You may not know that when you're pouring yourself into work, that's you pouring your heart out. You may not realize it, but it's what you're doing, because we're all going to pour our hearts out somewhere, in some way. Distractions, entertainment, in some way. We're all pouring our hearts out somewhere. But none of those things can be trusted to actually give you security, or me security, or salvation, or refuge, or shelter. Instead, pour your heart out to God. Worship team, just start to come back. Pour your heart out to God. Wait for him and only for him. Crying out to God is not a lack of trust. Crying out to God is the act of trust. And David tells us, do it not just once, but make it a constant practice at all times. At all times, taking those things that you're packing in there, not willing to let out, unpack them to God. Give them to him. Cry out to him. Not with anxiety, not with, please God, shaking him like he's a vending machine, but with that calmness and trust. God, I pour out my heart to you. Here's the stuff. Here's the stuff. This person betrayed me. This thing is letting me down. But I'm not going to trust in those things. I'm not going to trust in them. I don't have to preserve my own dignity, God. It's in your hands. It's in your hands, God. I trust you. I can be quiet. I can be calm. I just pour it out to you. This morning, let's practice waiting on him